Tonight's tale takes us deep into the shadows of a southern plantation, where secrets, betrayal, and forbidden desires lurk in every corner. Before we continue, comment below where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next story. Now, let's step into the shadows. No one dared to speak her name aloud. She was young, strikingly beautiful, and different, a truth that drew both fascination and contempt. "She loves women," they whispered behind closed doors, voices tinged with judgment and fear. Some feared her, some envied her, and one man, her own father, despised her. In a fit of shame and fury, he had decided she must pay for being who she was. One evening, as the golden sun sank behind the endless fields of the plantation and shadows stretched long across the polished floors of the grand house, he summoned the overseers and declared his decree: she will live with the male slaves, until she learns her place. Her heart pounded in her chest, not with fear, but with a defiance that burned brighter than the sun above the fields. She had been condemned in the eyes of the household, yet she carried a secret, a spark of cunning and resilience that no punishment could extinguish. As she was escorted through the hallways, the other slaves paused, their eyes following her. Whispers passed between them, a mixture of curiosity and caution. They had heard the rumors, the girl who was different, who had been marked by the household, and yet, they sensed something unusual in her presence. Something dangerous. That night, under the dim glow of lanterns and the heavy, expectant silence of the quarters, she surveyed her new surroundings. The men, the male slaves she was now placed among, studied her carefully, curiosity and skepticism etched into their faces. Each glance, each movement, each whisper carried meaning, and she observed it all. Alone, she whispered to herself, "They think they control me. They have no idea what's coming." And so, the first thread of rebellion, of quiet defiance, of something no one could have predicted, began to weave itself into the fabric of the plantation, a story of power, secrets, and tension that would challenge every rule her father had tried to impose. The lanterns flickered across the worn wooden walls of the male slave quarters, painting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The air was thick with sweat, smoke, and the earthy scent of labor, a world she had never fully known, yet one she now inhabited by her father's cruel decree. Every sound echoed differently here, a cough, a creak of the floorboards, even the faint shuffle of a foot. She noted them all. Her presence was met with cautious glances. The men whispered among themselves, some curious, some wary. They had heard the rumors, the master's daughter, deemed different, forced into their quarters as punishment. The whispers carried speculation and judgment. But she noticed something else, subtle recognition. They saw she was intelligent, aware, and not afraid. That alone set her apart from the others. Her father's intent had been clear. By placing her among the men, he sought to bend her, to break her, to teach her obedience and force her into a world she had always resisted. Yet, she refused to see herself as a victim. Fear would not bind her. She would endure, yes, but on her terms. The eldest among them, a man named Silas, stepped forward. His back was straight despite years of toil, and his gaze was sharp. "So, the master's girl comes to us," he said, voice low but commanding. "Do you know why you're here?" "I do," she replied, steady and unwavering. "But I intend to survive. And perhaps, learn something along the way." Her words were carefully chosen. Not defiant, yet not submissive. They carried subtle strength. Silas studied her, his eyes narrowing slightly, then relaxed. "Most of the ones sent here, they break. But I can see you won't. Watch carefully. Learn the rules. And you might last longer than they expect." From that moment, she understood the first rule of the quarters: control was not enforced through chains alone, it was woven through fear, respect, and observation. To survive here, she would need all three. The following days were a careful dance. She learned the routines of the male slaves, the way they divided chores, the subtle hierarchies that determined who spoke, who listened, and who acted. Each day, she observed, catalogued, and memorized. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered conversation was a lesson. Her father believed he had condemned her, but she was quietly gaining power in a place meant to subdue her. It was during one evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant fields, that she noticed the first crack in the system. A young man, Samuel, who had long been a worker in the fields, lingered near her quietly. His eyes were wary, yet there was something else, intrigue, a spark of curiosity. "You're not like the others," he said softly, careful that no one else overheard. "You move differently. You don't act scared." Fear, she realized, was a tool, as was silence. "I'm learning," she whispered back, her tone measured. "And observing. There's more to this world than most see." He studied her, clearly impressed. "Then perhaps, you might survive longer than anyone expects." Her lips curved in a faint smile. She had already begun to see the thread she could pull. Alliances could be formed, loyalty subtly gained, and influence quietly exerted. Her father thought he had delivered punishment, but she had discovered the first truth of her new world: power could be claimed with cunning and patience, not just physical strength. By the end of the first week, whispers of her presence began circulating quietly among the male slaves. They watched how she carried herself, how she spoke with measured precision, how she remained calm under scrutiny. A few of the younger men even began offering small gestures of deference, carrying water, fetching tools, providing subtle information, each act of respect earned through her calm, unwavering composure. But danger was never far. Overseers patrolled with hawk-like eyes, and the slightest misstep could ruin everything. A careless word, a look held too long, a gesture interpreted as disrespect, any of these could bring punishment swiftly. And her father's shadow loomed over all of it, reminder that failure carried not just immediate consequences, but a lifetime of shame. Still, as she lay on the rough straw mattress that night, her mind was alive. She thought of every glance exchanged, every whisper, every tiny act of observation. She considered the men around her, their desires, fears, and ambitions. She thought of the way power moved quietly through human relationships, unnoticed until it struck. And she began to plot, subtle, careful, almost invisible maneuvers that could shift the balance in her favor without ever attracting direct attention. The sun had barely risen over the plantation when she was already awake, crouched by the small window of the quarters, watching the fields glow gold under the morning light. The air was crisp, but her mind was sharper, alive with possibilities. She had spent a week among the male slaves, learning the rhythms of the quarters, understanding their fears, their loyalties, and their ambitions. Each glance, each word, each gesture had been catalogued. She now knew that survival here required more than endurance, it required strategy. The men of the quarters, initially wary, were beginning to respond to her subtle displays of composure and intelligence. She had noticed Samuel lingering near her again during morning chores, watching her with a mix of curiosity and caution. His presence was deliberate, yet respectful, a delicate balance that she recognized as a potential ally. "You move differently," Samuel said quietly as he passed her a bucket of water. "You don't flinch, don't shy away. Most girls would have been broken by now." Her lips curved slightly. "I observe," she whispered, placing the bucket down. "And I remember. That is how one survives here, and perhaps thrives." His eyes widened slightly at the word thrive, as though the idea was almost forbidden in this place. She caught the flicker of something in his gaze, admiration, curiosity, and maybe even fear. That was exactly the reaction she wanted. As the day wore on, she moved among them with calm precision, learning which men held influence and which merely followed orders. She observed Silas, the eldest, as he distributed tasks, noting how a slight gesture of his hand could cause obedience without a word. She watched Samuel and the younger men, noting where loyalties lay, and how quickly tension could flare into conflict. That evening, when the overseers had left for the far fields, she tested the first subtle boundaries. She approached Samuel quietly, leaning close enough for his ear alone. "You've seen me move carefully," she murmured. "Tell me, what do you think I could do here if I wanted to?" He looked at her cautiously, a flicker of excitement in his eyes. I don't know. But you'd be dangerous if you wanted to. You'd be unstoppable." Her smile was soft, almost imperceptible, yet it carried promise and threat at the same time. "Dangerous, perhaps. But only to those who underestimate me," she replied. That night, she lay on the straw mattress, replaying every glance, every word, every small interaction. She realized something crucial: power here was subtle, invisible, and psychological. If she played her part correctly, she could bend the men to her will without breaking a single rule openly. Over the next few days, she began quietly influencing the group. She offered small guidance during chores, shared strategic insights that seemed helpful but also subtly altered the balance of attention and respect among the men. Samuel and a few others began to look to her for advice, not out of command, but out of fascination and the recognition of her sharp mind. Yet, danger was never far. The overseer's patrols were unpredictable, and the slightest misstep could bring punishment swiftly. Even a careless word, a look held too long, or a subtle defiance could be punished severely. She knew that every action had to be precise, calculated, and invisible in its execution. One night, as a storm brewed in the distance, she took a quiet walk through the yard, her bare feet sinking into the wet earth. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the quarter walls, but she welcomed the storm. It mirrored her mind, restless, powerful, and full of energy waiting to be unleashed. She spoke softly to herself, "They think they control me. They are wrong. Every chain they place is just an opportunity, if I choose to use it." By the end of the chapter, the men in the quarters had begun to recognize her as someone different, a force not to be underestimated. Yet, no one could foresee the quiet storm gathering beneath her calm exterior. She had survived the first week, learned the patterns of the quarters, and begun laying the foundations for influence and subtle rebellion. The morning air was thick with the scent of damp earth, freshly turned soil, and the distant smoke from the master's chimneys. She had grown accustomed to the routines of the quarters, the predictable rhythm of labor, the hierarchy among the men, the subtle signals that carried authority without a word. Yet today felt different. There was an edge in the air, a tension that mirrored her own impatience. Over the past 2 weeks, she had quietly observed, learned, and influenced the male slaves. Samuel and a few of the younger men had begun to seek her guidance in small ways, which tools to use, how to organize their work, and which tasks could be done efficiently without attracting the overseer's attention. All of it seemed harmless to the others, yet each act of her influence quietly shifted the balance of control in her favor. She had begun to realize the full scope of her power. Perception was everything. The slaves saw her as clever and composed, yet no one suspected the depth of her cunning. Her father's punishment had been meant to humiliate and subdue her, but she had turned it into opportunity. And now, she was ready to test the limits of that opportunity. That evening, as the overseers returned from the far fields and the shadows of the quarters grew long, she gathered a small group of men, Samuel, Elias, and 2 others who had begun to show respect and curiosity toward her. They huddled together quietly, just out of earshot from the others. "I know why you watch me," she began, her voice low and steady, "and I know what your fears are. But you must understand this, I am not here to punish you, and I am not here to obey anyone blindly. I can make life easier for you, yes, if you follow my guidance. But you must trust me, and trust that I see what others do not." The men exchanged glances, hesitant yet intrigued. Elias spoke first, his tone cautious. "And if we trust you, what then?" She smiled faintly, a quiet, knowing smile that carried promise and danger at once. "Then we become stronger. Not by breaking rules, not by rebellion openly, but by bending the rules in ways they will never see coming. One careful move at a time." They nodded slowly, the seed of influence taking root. They could feel the weight of her intelligence, the precision of her observation, and the quiet authority she carried without raising a hand. It was intoxicating, and yet dangerous, a truth that hung in the air like the coming storm. As days passed, she began planting subtle strategies. A tool left conveniently for one of the overseers to find, a suggestion whispered to Samuel about how to organize the fields efficiently, a distraction created to allow a fellow slave a small moment of relief. Each action was minor in isolation, but collectively, they began to shape the environment in her favor. The other men noticed her influence but could not pinpoint how she had acquired it. The overseers, meanwhile, grew uneasy. Something in the quarters had shifted. The men were quieter, more deliberate in their movements, more careful with their words. A few subtle acts of defiance went unnoticed, a misaligned tool, a whispered plan, a glance that held meaning. Each was a ripple she had set into motion, testing the limits of what she could control. One night, as the wind howled and rain battered the roof, she spoke with Samuel alone. "They believe they command everything here," she said softly. "But the truth is, no one truly controls this place. Not the master, not the overseers. Power flows where the clever choose to place it." Samuel's eyes widened with realization. "Then you could change everything." Her lips curved in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Not just me," she said. "All of us. But we must be careful. One wrong move, one careless glance, and it all ends." The quarters were unusually quiet that evening. The overseers had retreated to the main house after a long day in the fields, leaving the men to their routines. But beneath the stillness, tension thrummed like a live wire. Every eye watched every movement, every footstep echoed a little too loudly. She sat on the edge of the rough straw mattress, observing her small circle of allies, Samuel, Elias, and 2 others. Each man had grown accustomed to her presence, to her calm and calculating gaze, and now they waited for guidance. She had spent weeks learning the rhythms of their lives, testing loyalties, and gauging fears. Tonight, she would test the limits of her influence. "Listen carefully," she whispered, leaning in close to the 4 men. "Tomorrow, the overseers will inspect the tools and fields. They will check for mistakes, misalignment, anything that seems out of place. We must make it appear perfect, while creating openings for ourselves." The men nodded, eyes wide but trusting. They had begun to understand that she was not merely clever, she could see things others missed, predict outcomes, and quietly bend circumstances without attracting attention. Her plan was daring, almost audacious. She had noticed that the overseers relied heavily on Samuel's coordination when aligning tools and directing tasks. A small misplacement here, a subtle suggestion there, and they could shift suspicion away from the men they were testing, without ever appearing disobedient. "Why risk it?" Elias asked, his voice low, wary. "If we're caught." "If we are careful," she said, her eyes locking with his, "we won't be. But if we do nothing, we remain under their thumb, powerless. Sometimes, control must be taken quietly, and carefully, or it is lost forever." That night, under the dim light of lanterns and the watchful eyes of shadows, the first threads of her plan were set in motion. She walked among the men, instructing them subtly, placing hints where necessary, shifting positions of tools and equipment just enough to give the illusion of compliance while setting the stage for her influence to grow. By early morning, the field was organized almost perfectly, and the overseers arrived with their habitual stern expressions. Yet, as they inspected the lines and alignment, subtle signs indicated that someone had guided the men's actions carefully. The overseer's suspicion flitted briefly between Samuel, Elias, and the others, but they could not pinpoint who had orchestrated it. She watched from the shadows, heart pounding quietly, aware that one misstep could expose everything. Yet she remained calm, composed, and utterly in control. After the overseers departed, satisfied that the tools and fields were in order, Samuel approached her quietly, his eyes alight with amazement. You planned this all along?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Not all. Just the parts they wouldn't notice. The rest, they think is their doing. Power is invisible, Samuel. Influence is unseen until it cannot be ignored." The success of this small act emboldened her. She realized that she could bend not only the men's actions but also their perceptions, carefully guiding them while keeping herself untouchable. Her father's punishment, intended to break her spirit and force her into submission, had inadvertently given her the tools to reshape her world quietly, strategically. Yet danger lurked at every turn. The overseers were vigilant, the other men cautious, and the shadows themselves seemed to hold secrets. She knew she could not rely on luck, only precision, cunning, and foresight. That night, as the wind howled outside the quarters and rain battered the roof, she spoke softly to herself, "They think they command this place. They think they hold power. But true power is earned quietly, invisibly. And I intend to take it, one careful step at a time." The sun barely broke the horizon when the first whispers began. In the quarters, a ripple of unease passed among the male slaves. Her influence, subtle and quiet until now, had started to leave its mark. Small changes in their routines, suggested strategies, and even minor manipulations of the overseers' expectations had begun to shift the dynamics. And though the overseers remained unaware, the plantation itself seemed to sense the disturbance, a tension in the air, a quiet questioning of authority. Samuel and Elias, her closest allies, had grown increasingly loyal. They followed her guidance, mimicking her calculated calm, speaking and moving with the precision she had taught them. The other men, though wary at first, began to notice the shift, subtle obedience toward her, quiet respect, and an almost imperceptible admiration. She moved among them like a shadow, observing, calculating, guiding without being seen as the force behind the change. Each word, each suggestion, was a thread in a growing web of control. The men's confidence increased, but so did the risk. One careless glance from an overseer, one misinterpreted action, could undo weeks of careful maneuvering. The first true test came that afternoon. The overseers returned early, their attention sharper than ever. They moved with the practiced scrutiny of men who had seen years of rebellion, defiance, and cunning among the slaves. Every line in their faces was a warning, every step carried authority and the potential for punishment. "Line up," one of the overseers barked, scanning the men's work in the fields. His gaze lingered longer than usual on Samuel and Elias, and for a moment, it seemed as though the subtle manipulations she had orchestrated might be uncovered. She held her ground in the shadows, heart steady, mind calculating. The key was timing, observation, and precise guidance. She whispered instructions under her breath to Samuel, who passed them discreetly along. The men shifted slightly, adjusted tools, corrected alignment, all invisible to the untrained eye, yet enough to avert suspicion. By the end of the inspection, the overseers nodded with a mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty, unaware that the outcome had been quietly orchestrated. Samuel and Elias exchanged a look, a combination of relief and awe, finally realizing the extent of her cunning. That night, the rain poured relentlessly outside, drumming against the roof of the quarters, a constant reminder of the storm, both literal and figurative, that now swirled around them. She sat quietly with Samuel, discussing the day's events. "You've done more than I imagined," he said softly. "You don't just survive here, you change things without anyone noticing." She smiled faintly, eyes glowing with quiet fire. "Control is invisible, Samuel. Influence is invisible. That is why it lasts. They can punish bodies, but not minds. And I intend to control both." Even as she plotted, she felt the subtle danger growing. Her father's intentions were cruel, the overseers vigilant, and the other men still unpredictable. Any misstep could be catastrophic. Yet, she had tasted the power of subtle rebellion, and it exhilarated her. Over the next few days, the small shifts began to ripple outward. Tools appeared more efficiently organized, work flowed smoother, and even the overseers began to notice, though they could not pinpoint the cause. The male slaves themselves began to move with confidence, emboldened by her quiet guidance. What had begun as whispers of curiosity had grown into a silent recognition. She was a force to be reckoned with. But power always invites danger. That evening, a new overseer arrived, someone from another plantation, unfamiliar with the subtleties of this one. His eyes were sharp, his demeanor harsher, and his presence alone unsettled the quarters. He questioned the arrangement of tools, inspected the men's work with an intensity that made even Samuel uneasy, and seemed to sense, without proof, that something had shifted. She observed him carefully, calculating her next moves. The storm outside raged harder, wind and rain lashing against the walls, as if mirroring the brewing tension within. She knew that maintaining control now required more than strategy, it required boldness, courage, and impeccable timing. One wrong move could expose everything she had built, and yet, the opportunity for a greater shift, for real influence over the men and the plantation, had never been closer. As she lay on her straw mattress that night, listening to the storm, she whispered quietly to herself, "They think they own this place. But power is not given, it is taken. And I will take it, one invisible step at a time." The quarters were unusually tense that morning. The wind from last night's storm had left the earth soft, the air heavy, and the sky overcast with low, rolling clouds. Even the seasoned male slaves seemed uneasy, aware of the new overseer's watchful eyes and the subtle disturbances in the rhythm of the plantation. She had spent days planning this moment, the first overt test of her influence. All of her observations, all the alliances she had quietly formed, were about to be put to the ultimate test. Her goal was simple yet dangerous, to show that her leadership and cunning could orchestrate an outcome that no overseer could predict, without overtly breaking the rules. Samuel and Elias waited near the toolshed, tension written in every line of their bodies. She approached them calmly, her presence commanding even without a raised voice. "Today," she said quietly, "we will see how far we can bend the rules, without being caught. Stay alert. Watch the overseers. Follow my lead. Trust me." The men nodded. There was no hesitation now, only a shared understanding. Over the past weeks, she had earned their trust, and they were beginning to see her not as the master's daughter, but as a force in her own right. The overseers arrived sooner than expected, scrutinizing every detail of the tools, the fields, and the men themselves. Their gaze fell heavily on Samuel and Elias, the two men who had shown the most initiative in following her guidance. Yet, what they did not see was the subtle choreography she had orchestrated. Every movement, every word, every adjustment had been calculated. When the overseers inspected the alignment of the tools, they found everything perfect. When they questioned the men, Samuel and Elias responded with confidence and precision, deflecting attention from the small but significant manipulations she had set into motion. It was a delicate balance, one wrong gesture, one misstep, and the entire plan could collapse. But she had anticipated every contingency, every reaction, and her mind moved faster than anyone around her. As the inspection ended and the overseers moved on, a thrill of victory passed quietly through the quarters. The men exchanged glances, silently acknowledging her brilliance without a single word. She had proven, subtly yet unmistakably, that she could orchestrate outcomes in a world designed to control her. Yet the danger was far from over. Her father's punishment had been designed to break her, and though the overseers were momentarily satisfied, there were still those who watched for cracks in her composure. One careless glance or ill-timed word could undo everything. That evening, as the shadows deepened in the quarters and the men settled into uneasy rest, she whispered to Samuel and Elias, her tone low and serious, "What we did today was only the beginning. Influence is not about obedience, it is about perception. They must see what they expect to see, while we quietly control what they cannot perceive. Do you understand?" Samuel nodded, eyes wide with awe and a touch of fear. "Yes. But, how far can this go?" Her gaze was steady, unflinching. "As far as we are clever. As far as we are patient. One misstep, and all is lost. But if we are careful, we can change everything, right here, under their eyes." The night grew darker, and the plantation fell silent. Yet inside the quarters, a quiet storm of strategy and ambition simmered. She lay awake on her straw mattress, listening to the soft sounds of the men breathing, of the distant fields, and of the night itself. Her mind worked tirelessly, anticipating challenges, observing weaknesses, and planning her next move. The plantation was unusually silent that morning. Even the birds seemed to hesitate in their songs, as if sensing the storm that loomed over the fields. Inside the male quarters, an uneasy energy buzzed in the air. Her influence had grown too noticeable to ignore, subtle as it had been. Samuel, Elias, and the others moved with confidence now, but that very confidence had begun to attract attention. Her father had been informed of irregularities, subtle efficiencies in the work, men acting with an unexpected quiet boldness, and whispers among the male slaves that carried hints of defiance. The overseers, uneasy and frustrated, had warned the men to be more vigilant, but their eyes were no match for her planning. She walked among the men in the early morning shadows, her calm composure a stark contrast to the tension in the room. "Today," she said softly, "we test them again. But this time, they will notice. They will feel the shift, and they will not know where it comes from." Samuel exchanged a glance with her, worry flickering in his eyes. "Father will be here," he said cautiously. "He won't like this." She met his gaze evenly. "He doesn't need to like it. He only needs to see it happen without understanding how. Power is silent. Influence is invisible. And today, we reveal the first sign of both." By midday, the master of the plantation had arrived, her father himself, walking with the slow, deliberate air of a man used to commanding obedience. His eyes, sharp and cold, swept across the quarters as he spoke. "I hear strange things about my daughter's new living arrangements," he said, his voice low but menacing. "Tell me, what is happening here?" Her pulse remained steady. She had anticipated this moment. She approached him calmly, every step measured. "Father," she said, "I am simply helping the men organize their work more efficiently. They respect you, and I only wish to assist them in performing their duties better." Her father's eyes narrowed, sensing more than she revealed. "And you believe this is appropriate?" "I believe," she said, her voice unwavering, "that they work harder, follow orders more precisely, and respect your authority more fully. All while learning to rely on themselves, as you wish." Her words were carefully chosen, truthful in part, yet hiding the deeper truth of her subtle orchestration. Her father studied her, suspicion flickering, but he found no overt fault. The seed she had planted had shielded her from exposure, at least for now. That evening, after her father departed, she gathered Samuel, Elias, and the others in a quiet corner of the quarters. Today, she said, voice low and intense, was the first time we faced true scrutiny. And yet, we succeeded. Do you see what I have done? Do you understand how influence works? Samuel nodded, awe and a hint of fear in his eyes. Yes, but father will notice sooner or later. How long can we keep this up? As long as we are clever, she replied. And careful. One mistake, one slip, and everything ends. But if we act with precision, patience, and strategy, nothing can stop us. The men looked at her with a mixture of respect, loyalty, and silent admiration. She was no longer just a master's daughter or a punished girl, she had become a quiet force within the quarters, a leader they trusted implicitly. Yet, the risk was growing. Her father's suspicion had been aroused, the overseers were watchful, and the storm of tension around her was palpable. Every decision, every word, every glance carried weight. And she knew the next move could either cement her influence or expose her to ruin. As the night fell, the wind howled and lightning split the sky. She stood by the small window of the quarters, looking out across the fields. They think they control me, she whispered, but control is an illusion. Power lies in perception, in influence, and I hold both now. The morning sun rose weakly over the plantation, casting long, uncertain shadows across the fields. The air was tense, heavy with anticipation, not just in the quarters, but in the grand house itself. Her father had returned, sharper, angrier, and more suspicious than ever. He had noticed the subtle changes, the efficiency in the work, the quiet confidence of the male slaves. Today, he intended to confront her, to finally impose his will and break her spirit. She had anticipated this moment for weeks. Every interaction, every whispered instruction, every subtle act of influence had been building toward this exact confrontation. She moved through the quarters with calm precision, checking on Samuel, Elias, and the others. Remember, she whispered, today is about perception. We act as if we obey, but we guide everything. One wrong move, and it ends. But if we are clever, we win. Her father arrived at the quarters, his presence commanding and severe. His eyes, sharp and unrelenting, swept across the men. I hear whispers, he said, voice low but full of menace. Whispers of disobedience, of my daughter influencing my men. Tell me, is this true? She stepped forward, calm, composed, unafraid. Father, she said, voice steady, I am only helping the men perform better. They respect your authority and follow your commands. I merely assist them to fulfill your wishes more efficiently. Her father's gaze narrowed, suspicion flashing. And you believe this is true? That they obey you? Yes, she said, locking eyes with him. They obey because they respect your authority, and because they have learned that I guide them carefully. Nothing more, nothing less. He studied her, torn between disbelief, anger, and the faint acknowledgement of her intelligence. He could sense the subtle power she held over the men, yet he could not openly confront it without exposing his own authority. That night, after her father had returned to the main house, she gathered the male slaves for a quiet meeting in the shadows of the quarters. Today, she whispered, we faced the greatest test yet. They watched, they probed, they threatened, and yet, we succeeded. Not by rebellion, not by force, but by subtlety. By influence. By patience. Do you see now what we can do? Samuel and Elias nodded, awe and respect in their eyes. Yes, Samuel said. We follow you, because you see what we cannot. Because you guide us, without being seen. She smiled faintly, a quiet, victorious smile. This is only the beginning. The master believes he holds power. The overseers believe they watch all. But influence is invisible. Perception is everything. And now, we are unbound. In the following days, subtle but irreversible changes began to take hold. The male slaves worked efficiently, confidently, and with an almost imperceptible boldness. Her father remained unaware of the quiet rebellion, the invisible thread she had woven through the quarters. And in the center of it all stood she, calm, cunning, and in control. The shadows of the plantation stretched long into the night, silent witnesses to the quiet power she had claimed. In a world built on oppression, she had found freedom, not by defiance alone, but by mastering the art of influence, perception, and patience.